So in this lecture, I want to keep talking about begging the question, or really, what I want to say more about than begging the question is, you know, ranking how controversial a premise is or how plausible it is. So we have this question, how do we know what premises are plausible, or at least more plausible? Well, I don't want to estimate how or overestimate how hard this is because I think sometimes it's actually not that hard. Often, Lavin has this little graph with these claims about Elvis. The longer the bar is, the more controversial. This is in the burden of proof stuff, but it applies to begging the question too. The same concepts of more or less controversial pop up here. You know, you can probably look at a series of statements and give yourself a little bar graph of how controversial they are. And people might not completely agree, but I think we're going to have more agreement than we might think, right? But anyway, at least to start with, there's two questions you can ask yourself together that will help you determine how plausible, how controversial a claim is. How confident am I that this statement is true? If you are only 60%, well, might be a lot of other people who aren't even 60%. If you're not that confident, it's probably going to be a controversial statement. It's not going to be a foundation to build your argument on, right? One way to think of an argument is the premises bear the weight of the conclusion. And if you don't think the material's great, well, right? The chances of it collapsing are way greater. But even if you are really, really, really sure of it, you might ask yourself, how likely do I think it is that a random person would agree? If I picked a random person off the street, how likely is it that this person would agree to this statement, right? If you are a Republican, you might think it's really, really likely true. You might be really confident that Donald Trump was a pretty good president. But at the same time, you should know that half the population didn't vote for him, roughly half, right? There are about as many Democrats as Republicans. There's a good chance a random person you pick off the street is not going to agree with you on that claim, no matter how certain you might be of it, right? Same if you're a Democrat and you want to make these claims about Obama, right? You might be really, really, really sure of that, but you know that there's a good chance a random person off the street wouldn't be sure of it, that they might not even agree with you. Another mark here is if it's easier to imagine what ways that one statement could be false than another, that's a good sign the first statement is less plausible, more controversial. Take these statements. All physicians are intelligent. Practically all physicians are intelligent. Most physicians are intelligent. Some physicians are intelligent, right? What would you need to do to disprove these claims? If you found one stupid doctor, you could disprove the claim that all physicians are intelligent. We had this quack doctor in my hometown, long dead Dr. Martin. Dr. Martin was not a smart man. He got his medical license during World War II when they needed people to patch up people who were injured. The bar was lowered. Dr. Martin was a quack. You did not want to go to Dr. Martin if you could help it. Unless you just wanted drugs, then, if you just wanted mind-altering drugs, Dr. Martin was your dude, right? But if you actually wanted to be diagnosed and not die, Dr. Martin was maybe not a great guy, right? So I present to you, Dr. Martin's long dead, but I present to you Dr. Martin from my hometown. Not a smart man. I can prove not all physicians are intelligent, right? But look, if I say practically all physicians are intelligent, well, I'm just saying most, the vast majority. Well, I show you Dr. Martin, and it's like, well, I never said every, I just said most, right? You need to find a lot more stupid physicians to disprove this claim. Even if you found a lot of stupid doctors, it wouldn't disprove the claim that most are intelligent, right? You'd have to have at least some representative sample and show that by whatever standard of intelligence, these guys don't meet it, right? Some physicians are intelligent is even harder to disprove, right? So, some idea of what's more or less controversial here. Now, obviously, this can't be enough, though, right? But we can do more, right? Look, we generally have a sense of which premises are more or less controversial. Like you could easily sort the following claims from more or less controversial, right? Elvis is probably alive, Elvis is dead, Elvis is probably dead, Elvis is almost certainly dead, Elvis is alive. It is possible that Elvis is alive, it's also possible he's dead, right? Most of us could agree how to rank these claims. This would be the ranking I would give it, right? It is possible that Elvis is dead. It's also possible he's alive. He's probably dead. He's almost certainly dead. He's dead. He's probably alive. He's alive, right? Now, formally, in the form, probably dead, probably alive, have the same form, right? But just look. We've seen all this evidence from the time we were kids that Elvis is dead. Common knowledge, he's dead. You can tour Graceland. They won't, people in Memphis, many of them are very obsessed with Elvis and they're very sad and they won't, tell you the tragedy of Elvis. He's almost certainly dead. Statements that he's dead are less controversial than statements that claim he's alive. Or take my physicians one, right? Claims that physicians are intelligent are always going to be more plausible, less controversial than, some is vague, so some are intelligent, some are stupid, might be tied. Some might be as few as one. But for the most part, claims that doctors are intelligent, more plausible, less controversial than claims that they're stupid. Why? Given what we know about doctors, you generally have to be pretty intelligent to become one, right? Now, ideally, you guys might be saying, oh, what's all this stuff about controversial, non-controversial? Don't we want true premises, right? Ideally, we do, right? The problem is that in real life, the voice of God is not going to boom from heaven and tell you what's true and not. We can work with premises we think are true and that we think others are likely to accept as true. It's going to be impossible to find premises that there is no doubt whatsoever that God himself has told us these are true. The best you can often do is to find the least controversial, the most plausible premises. And now look, we disagree about a lot of things, right? There's a lot of disagreement in our society. Flip on the radio and you'll hear some talking head lamenting about how polarized we are as a society, right? But I actually think there's more agreement on controversial claims or how controversial claims are than we might think, right? This is true even when it's an issue that is super controversial and there's a lot of disagreement about. Killing an infant is wrong. All forms of birth control are wrong. Abortion is wrong except when necessary to save the life of the mother. Abortion is always wrong. Even if you are hardcore pro-life, it should be obvious to you that these first, even if you think that 4 is right, I think it should be obvious to you that 1, 2, 3 here are less controversial, right? We can agree on this even if we wildly disagree about the question of abortion itself. Or take this, right? FDR was a great president, Lincoln was a great president, Obama was a great president, Reagan was a great president, Jimmy Carter was a great president, Richard Nixon was a great president. Look, if you're a Democrat, you're going to order this differently than if you're a Republican, right? If you're a Democrat, you'll probably put this in the order that they are here. If you're a Republican, though, are you going to put Reagan Nixon were great presidents and FDR wasn't? No, right? If you're a Democrat, are you going to say that FDR was and Carter was, but Lincoln wasn't? No, right? We can agree on a rough order here. FDR and Lincoln claims that their great presidents are more plausible than claims that Obama or Reagan are great presidents. Claims that Obama or Reagan are great presidents more plausible than Jimmy Carter or Richard Nixon. Even if you think poor old Jimmy Carter gets a bad rap as a president, and I'll be honest, I tend to think he does. I think he was probably a better president than he gets credit for. It's way more controversial to assert that than it would be that Reagan's a great president, much less that Lincoln is, right? Now, why do we talk so much about controversial versus non-controversial premises? Now look, we've already seen if your premises are more controversial than your conclusion, that's a huge problem. That is begging the question. Your argument is not going to work because you're not giving the other person, somebody who disagrees with you, any reason to accept the conclusion. But more generally, the less controversial, more plausible your premises are, the stronger your argument is. As a general rule, use the least controversial premises you possibly can to establish your conclusion. Now think back to filling in premises, missing premises, and the principle of charity, right? And one thing I've been telling you guys is don't give too strong a claim to this person. This is what's behind it. The less controversial the premises you give the other person when you're rebuilding their argument, the stronger their argument is. That's why you don't want to assume any more than you need to on their behalf. But when making your own arguments, always use the least controversial premises that will justify your conclusion. You know, there's a sort of dance here, right? If your premises are too, the more boring your premises are, the less likely the other person is to reject them. But the more boring, the less controversial they are, the less likely they are to maybe justify your conclusion, right? So you've got to, it's like a lot of other stuff we've seen so far, you have to strike a balance. So here's some examples of arguments. One version uses a more controversial premise and is a weaker argument for it. The other uses a less controversial premise and is stronger. For the state to execute someone is murder, and murder is wrong, so we should abolish the death penalty. We've already seen this as a question-begging argument, super controversial premise. Here's an argument that uses two premises, where that one used one, but they're way less controversial. Killing an innocent person is morally wrong. If we have the death penalty, mistakes will inevitably occur, and the innocent will be executed, or some innocent people will be executed, so we should abolish the death penalty. You might not buy this argument. You might not think it's a good enough reason to abolish the death penalty, but at the very least, this claim that it's wrong to kill an innocent person and that mistakes will happen are way more plausible, way harder to object to than are this bald claim that death penalty is murder. Another one, very similar to another one we looked at that was question begging. Taking people's property without their consent is stealing. Taking the property of the rich to help the poor, taxing the rich to help the poor takes property from the rich without their consent, and so is stealing. Therefore, it is wrong to tax the rich to help the poor. These other statements just draw out what's in the first premise, but the first premise is super controversial, right? Even if you think it's wrong to tax the rich to help the poor, you might very well think, and most people do think, that it's sometimes okay to take people's property without their consent, right? If you think it's okay to tax people for national defense or to pay the police or, to requisition their car if you need to do that to save someone's life, then you don't think it's always wrong to take someone's property without their consent, that it's always stealing. Better argument because it uses a less controversial premise. The government is justified in preventing us from harming others, but it is wrong for the government to force us to help another person. Taxing the rich to help the poor forces us to help the poor, that forces the rich to help the poor. Therefore, it is wrong to tax the rich to help the poor, right? Not saying this is necessarily a good argument, not saying you have to be convinced by it, not even saying that all of these premises are necessarily true. I'm just saying these are more plausible premises, and so this is a better argument than as the previous one. Now look, does this mean we can never ever use controversial premises in an argument? Obviously not, right? But if you do use a controversial premise, you use one that you think it's probable that a random person wouldn't accept, then you need some support. And the more controversial that premise is, the more support you need. Argument, evidence, etc. Now that leaves open this question of how do we justify using controversial premises, which we'll talk a bit more about in coming weeks. But it also opens up a bigger issue. How can we check premises we don't find controversial, right? Because we might have this worry that even if we all agree on it, we might be wrong, right? Lavin talks about this. After all, many principles, claims, whatever that we now find crazy or awful were at one time taken to be obviously true, right? If you read ancient Greek philosophers like Plato or Aristotle, it never seems to occur to them that slavery is wrong, right? That slavery is okay just seems as clear to Aristotle as that the sky is blue does to us, right? Not saying this to poop on Plato or Aristotle. To the average Greek, especially the average free Greek man of their time, these were obviously true claims, right? Well, take something a little less loaded. For many years, it was obviously true to everybody that the sun revolved around the earth and not the other way. We now know that to be wrong. There's a deep philosophical issue here. I'm not going to get too deeply into it. We could do a whole semester on it. I'll say a little bit about this, how we can test premises that aren't controversial. But take it from me, there's a big problem that we just don't have time to get into in logic. But for now, at the very least, try to use premises that aren't controversial, that are as uncontroversial, that are as plausible as possible.